Her blade shattered against him, and the smile that came after changed everything. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly under a sun that seemed determined to burn the world clean. Heat waves shimmered above the sand and red rock, blurring the horizon into a wavering mirage. The ground was cracked and brittle, like it might splinter apart under the weight of a single step. The air was dry enough to pull the moisture from a man's lungs, and silence ruled the land, broken only by the occasional hiss of wind through thorny brush. Ethan Keller moved through this wasteland with the uneven gait of a man who'd been running for too long on borrowed strength. His right leg was a mess, torn muscle, a shallow but angry cut running from knee to shin, bleeding just enough to make every step a reminder of how mortal he was. A strip of his shirt, ripped and tied tight, pressed against the wound. It wasn't much, but it had kept him moving. He scanned the horizon with the wary precision of someone who knew that danger in the desert didn't always make noise before it struck. Somewhere out there, in the vast stillness, she was watching him. And she wasn't human. He'd first seen her 2 nights ago. Pale skin like the underbelly of moonlight, hair black as the space between stars. She moved differently than anyone he'd met. Every step was balanced, calculated, but with a fluid grace that almost hid the lethal precision behind it. The light caught in her hair in strange ways, as if every strand had a will of its own, refusing to reflect the sun, but drinking in its fire. She hadn't given him a name, or maybe she had, in a language his mind couldn't quite hold on to. She spoke English when she needed to, her voice soft, but with an edge that made it hard to forget. Her eyes, impossibly dark and bright at once, had locked onto his the moment they met, like she'd already decided how their story would end. Now, the desert between them was a game board, and Ethan knew he was just one wrong move from losing more than his leg. He stopped to catch his breath behind a jagged outcrop of rock, sliding down until his back met the stone. His pulse thundered in his ears. He reached for the canteen at his side, but the water inside was warm, almost hot, the last sip tasting faintly of metal. "Why are you running?" The voice came from above him. Ethan jerked his head up, and there she was, standing on the rock, framed against the sun. The wind caught her hair, sending black strands across her face. She didn't blink, didn't even look like the heat touched her. "You already know why," he said, his voice dry and ragged. Her gaze swept over him, lingering on the bloodied bandage around his leg. She tilted her head slightly, and for a moment, there was something unreadable in her expression. Pity, curiosity, amusement. Then, without warning, she dropped down from the rock, silent as a shadow. Ethan reached for the knife at his belt, but she was faster. In one smooth motion, she drew a slender blade, black metal catching a dull gleam in the desert light. She didn't hesitate. The blade darted forward, low, aimed for the weak point, his injured leg. Steel met flesh, and then the impossible happened. The blade shattered. The sound was sharp and brittle, echoing across the empty flats. Shards of the weapon spun through the air, glittering briefly before falling into the sand. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Her eyes went wide, just enough for him to know she hadn't expected it. She looked down at the useless hilt in her hand, then up at him. And Ethan, despite the throbbing in his leg, despite the danger, despite the fact that she could kill him a dozen other ways, smiled. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't mockery. It was something else entirely, quiet, dangerous, and certain. The kind of smile that meant the game had just changed. For a moment, the desert forgot how to breathe. The wind stilled, the sun seemed to hang heavier in the sky, and even the heat waves felt frozen in place. The two of them stood in that strange pause, bound by the sound of steel giving up against something it should have cut through. She stared at the broken weapon in her hand, her grip tightening until her knuckles whitened. The dark metal hilt seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive, before going still. Whatever alien alloy it was made from, Ethan had just proven it wasn't invincible. "Ow," she asked, her voice quiet, but not weak. Her accent was subtle, almost unplaceable, but there was a rhythm to it that didn't belong to Earth. Ethan didn't answer right away. He shifted his weight, testing his bad leg, ignoring the fresh pulse of pain. "Maybe you just hit the wrong spot," he said, his tone casual but his eyes locked on hers. Her gaze narrowed. "There is no wrong spot. She took a step toward him. Ethan's fingers flexed near the knife, still sheathed at his belt. He wasn't going to start this fight, but he wasn't about to let her finish it, either. "I told you," Ethan said. "You don't want to do this." "I told you," she countered. "I have no choice." The words hung between them, heavier than the heat. A choice not to fight wasn't an option for her, and that meant whatever order she was following were more dangerous than she was. A sudden gust swept across the flats, stinging his eyes with sand. When it cleared, she was already moving, circling him, keeping her distance but never letting his back turn fully toward her. Without the blade, she was still a threat. Her movements were deliberate, each step silent on the dry earth, her balance unshaken. Ethan could feel the weight of her studying him, not just his stance or his injury, but something deeper, like she was reading the blueprint of his thoughts. "You don't know what you've stepped into, human," she said. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Lady, I've been in trouble since the day I could walk. This doesn't feel all that different." That earned him the faintest lift of her brow, a crack in her mask of composure. "You think you can survive this?" "I've survived worse," he lied. She stopped moving, her shadow stretching across the cracked earth toward him. "You're not like the others." "What others?" he asked. Her eyes darkened, and for a second he thought she might actually tell him. But then she shook her head, as if shutting the door on a secret she wasn't ready to share. "You'll find out soon enough," she said. They both heard it at the same time, a low, distant hum, growing louder. Ethan's head snapped toward the horizon. A shimmer of heat distorted the air, but through it, he could make out three shapes moving fast. Not on foot, hovering. Her posture changed instantly, the faint tension in her shoulders tightening into readiness. "They're here for you?" Ethan asked. "They're here for us." "Us?" She didn't answer, already scanning for cover. Her eyes settled on the jagged ridge about 50 yards to the east. Without another word, she started running toward it. Ethan cursed under his breath and followed, his legs screaming in protest with every step. The hum grew louder, now with an undertone, a sharp metallic whine that felt like it was slicing the air itself. By the time they reached the ridge, the shapes were close enough for him to see them clearly. Sleek, black craft, each no bigger than a motorcycle, but gliding above the sand without any visible means of support. Twin fins curved backward from their rears, and at the front, a single glowing lens stared ahead like an unblinking eye. She pulled him down behind the rocks just as the first craft swept over. The heat from its engines, or whatever passed for engines, washed over them in a sudden, choking wave. Ethan could smell ozone and something else, sharp and alien. "They're scanning," she whispered. "For me. For both of us. You've been marked now." Ethan shot her a look. "I didn't exactly sign up for her." She cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Stay quiet." The craft passed overhead, slow and deliberate. A faint red beam played over the rocks, searching. Ethan's hand tightened on his knife, useless as it might be against whatever technology they were using. The beam paused for a heartbeat, right on the ridge where they hid. Then came a sound, a high-pitched snap, followed by the crack of energy discharging. The rock next to Ethan's head exploded into dust and shards. "They found us," he shouted. She didn't wait. In one fluid motion, she grabbed his arm and pulled him deeper along the ridge, keeping low as another blast scorched the ground where he'd just been. "Why are they after you?" he demanded, half running, half stumbling. "I took something from them." "And me?" She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "You got in the way." They ducked into a narrow crevice between two slabs of rock. The craft circled overhead, their hum vibrating through the stone. For a long moment, the air felt charged, like the seconds before a lightning strike. Finally, the hum began to fade, the craft sweeping farther out into the desert. Ethan leaned back against the stone, breathing hard. "You want to explain what the hell that was?" She met his gaze, and for the first time since they met, he saw something unguarded in her eyes. "If I tell you," she said softly, "you'll never be able to go back to your old life." Ethan gave a tired, crooked smile. "Pretty sure that ship's already sailed." Her lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Then I'll tell you," she said, "but you won't like it." The desert seemed quieter after the craft disappeared, but Ethan knew it was a lie. Quiet wasn't safety. It was the inhale before the strike. He stayed in the shadow of the rock, catching his breath. The heat had turned the air inside the crevice into something heavy, hard to pull into his lungs. The ache in his leg was worse now, a deep, throbbing burn, but he kept his weight off it as best he could. She stood a few feet away, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something he couldn't hear. "They're not gone," she said finally. "You've got some kind of sixth sense or—" Her gaze flicked toward him, dark eyes unreadable. "I can hear the shift in the air when they move. They're circling, looking for a better angle." Ethan swore under his breath. "Then we should get moving." "We can't," she said. "Not until I've done what I came here to do." "You mean whatever you stole from them?" She didn't confirm or deny it. Instead, she reached into the inside of her coat and pulled something out. Ethan expected a weapon. What she held was stranger. It was a small cube, no bigger than a fist, made of a material he couldn't place, neither metal nor glass. The surface shifted faintly, as though light and shadow flowed across it like water. "What is that?" "It's the only thing keeping your planet alive right now," she said flatly. He stared at her, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. "Care to explain that before my head explodes?" Her fingers tightened around the cube. "It's a fragment of a containment core. Without it, the field around your world collapses. They want it back before the collapse begins." Ethan let out a low, disbelieving laugh. "So what, you're the good guy in this story?" "No," she said without hesitation. That caught him off guard. "Then why?" A sharp, low vibration rattled the rocks around them, cutting him off. She turned toward the sound, eyes narrowing. "They found us again." "How?" "They can track the cube." Ethan stared at her. "So we're sitting here with a giant, glowing target in your hand." Her jaw tightened. "It doesn't glow. That's not the point." The hum was closer now, joined by another, deeper tone that made the air in Ethan's chest vibrate. She shoved the cube into a small pouch at her hip, then drew another weapon, a short, curved blade made of the same black alloy as the one that had broken against his leg. "You take the ridge," she said. "I'm not leaving you here." "Ethan, they don't care about you right now. But if you stay, they will." Something in her voice made him pause. Not fear. She didn't strike him as the type to panic. But urgency, the kind born from knowing exactly how bad the next few seconds were about to get. The hum rose to a near-deafening pitch. Then the first craft shot in a view above the ridge. It moved fast, far faster than any human-made machine could in this terrain, skimming just feet above the sand, the glowing lens at its front flaring bright red. Ethan dropped low as a beam of heat sliced past, close enough to singe his skin. The beam struck the rock wall behind him, leaving a molten scar that hissed in the dry air. She didn't flinch. In one smooth motion, she launched herself up the ridge, using the uneven rock face like steps. The craft adjusted instantly, angling to meet her midair. Ethan couldn't look away. She moved like liquid steel, twisting, turning, every shift of her body perfectly measured. Her blade met the craft's hull in a shower of sparks, leaving a deep scar in its sleek surface. The machine jolted back, its hum faltering. Another craft screamed in from the right, forcing Ethan to scramble for cover. He could feel the heat from its engines as it passed overhead. She landed in a crouch beside him, breathing hard but steady. "Two more," she said. "That's 3 total," he said. "Do you always do math like that when people are trying to kill you?" Her mouth twitched, almost like a suppressed smile. "It keeps me alive." The third craft came in low and fast. Firing before it even cleared the ridge. A beam tore through the ground near Ethan's feet, sending sand and shards of rock into the air. He rolled behind cover, but his leg betrayed him, the jolt of pain sharp enough to make him hiss. She noticed, her eyes flicking to the wound. "You can't run much farther," she said. Wasn't planning on running. She studied him for a moment, then tossed him a small object, about the size of a lighter, smooth and metallic. "What's this?" he asked. "Last resort." Point at one of them, press the switch, and get down. He didn't have time to ask questions. One of the craft roared past the ridge, the red glow in its lens brightening. Ethan aimed the device, thumb pressing the switch. A pulse of blinding blue light shot out, silent but powerful enough to make his vision blur. The craft froze midair for less than a second, then dropped straight into the sand with a sound like metal tearing in half. Ethan stared at the wreckage. That was... Don't get attached, she cut in. It only works once. The other two craft hesitated, as if recalculating. Then, in perfect sync, they backed off, hovering at a distance, their red lenses fixed on the ridge. They're waiting, Ethan said. She nodded grimly. For reinforcements. We need to move now. Ethan pushed himself upright, his legs screaming with every step. And where exactly are we going? To somewhere they can't follow, she said. Is that a real place, or just something you say to make me feel better? Her dark eyes met his. It's real, but it's not on any map you've ever seen. The hum of the craft stayed with them as they left the ridge, a reminder that the desert wasn't theirs anymore. Every shadow felt like an ambush waiting to happen, every gust of wind carrying the taste of ozone. Ethan didn't know what waited at this place she spoke of. He didn't know if she was leading him towards safety or into the jaws of something worse. But he did know one thing. He was already too deep in to turn back. The desert stretched ahead, merciless and endless. But she moved like she knew exactly where to place her feet, as if she could see paths invisible to him. Ethan followed, his breath coming in short bursts, his injured leg dragging just enough to leave a faint trail in the sand. The hum of the two remaining craft followed at a distance, like wolves shadowing prey. Every now and then, one would drift closer, the red glow in its lens flaring, before easing back again. They're hurting us, Ethan said, keeping his voice low. Yes, she replied without looking back. That doesn't bother you. It should, she admitted. But it means they haven't called down the hunter drones yet. If they do, we won't outrun them. Ethan filed that away under things I really didn't need to know right now. They crested a low ridge, and the view opened into a broad, cracked basin. In the center, jagged pillars of dark stone jutted from the earth, casting long, skeletal shadows. They didn't look natural. This the place? He asked. No, she said, but close enough. She led him down into the basin, weaving between the stone pillars. The air here felt different, heavier, almost humming, like the rocks themselves were charged with some kind of energy. Ethan touched one as they passed, and yanked his hand back instantly. It's warm. They've been absorbing heat for hours, she said. When night falls, they'll release it, like a battery. Her lips curved faintly. Something like that. They reached a narrow gap between two of the tallest pillars. She slipped through first, gesturing for him to follow. On the other side was a small hollow, hidden from above by the leaning stone spires. This will buy us a few minutes, she said, kneeling to check the contents of her pouch. The cube was still there, shifting faintly with its strange internal light. Ethan leaned against the stone, breathing hard. Okay, you've dragged me through half the desert, dodged flying death machines, and given me about 3 answers that made sense. I think it's time you tell me what's really going on. Her hand stilled on the pouch. For a long moment, she didn't look at him. Then she said, I told you the cube keeps your planet alive. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. He waited, watching her closely. The field it maintains doesn't just protect Earth from them. It hides you. Without it, they'll see every human settlement, every resource, every weakness. Ethan's stomach tightened. And then what? Then you'll see what happens to worlds they don't find useful. The way she said it left no room for misunderstanding. You could have just left it with whoever it belonged to, Ethan said. Why take it? Her eyes met his, sharp and unflinching. Because they would have used it to destroy someone else. You stole a weapon. I stole a shield. One they were going to twist into a sword. Ethan rubbed his temple. Great. So now you've got their stolen tech. They're hunting you. And by extension, me. And the only way out is to what? Hide forever. No, she said. We get it to someone who can use it. Someone who won't trade it for their own survival. Ethan barked a dry laugh. Sounds like a fairy tale. Her gaze softened slightly, but her tone stayed hard. Sometimes fairy tales are the only thing standing between you and the dark. Before he could respond, a sudden vibration rolled through the ground beneath them. She was on her feet instantly. They found us. Ow. Doesn't matter. She reached into her coat and pulled out something new. 2 slim cylinders connected by a coil of metallic fiber. She tossed one to him. Wrap it around your wrist. Don't touch the coil. Ethan fumbled with it, the metal cool and faintly humming in his hand. What does it? The roar cut him off. Not the steady hum of the smaller craft. This was deeper, heavier, vibrating through his chest like a drumbeat. Her expression told him everything. Hunter drone. It descended from the sky like a nightmare, black as obsidian, twice the size of the others, with jagged protrusions that looked disturbingly like claws. Her glowing red eyes scanned the basin as it hovered, casting long, broken shadows across the pillars. Ethan's grip on the cylinder tightened. That thing's not here to chase us, is it? No, she said. It's here to end this. The drone moved with terrifying precision, every adjustment in its position silent, every shift in its red gaze calculated. It swept the basin, the stones casting enough cover to keep them hidden, for now. What's the plan? Ethan asked. She glanced toward the far side of the basin. We split. You run for the ridge. I'll draw it off. Not happening, he said instantly. If it catches you, the cube's protection won't matter, she snapped. And if it catches you, none of this matters, he shot back. For a moment, their stares locked, two immovable forces refusing to give way. Then she did something he didn't expect. She smiled. Fine, she said. But if you stay, you follow my lead. No heroics. No promises, he muttered. The drone's gaze passed over their hiding spot. They moved. She darted left, Ethan right, weaving between the pillars in a coordinated zigzag that kept them just out of the drone's direct sight line. A blast tore through the stone above Ethan's head, sending shards raining down. Another blast followed, cutting a molten line across the sand. The air stank of scorched earth and ozone. They reached the far edge of the basin. She raised her cylinder, pressing something on its side. A pulse of white light flared between the two devices, hers and his, forming a thin, shimmering line in the air. Through, she shouted. Ethan didn't hesitate. He stepped into the light, and the world tilted. For a moment, the desert, the heat, the drone, all of it dissolved into a blur of color and sound, like falling into a rippling pool. Then he was standing somewhere else entirely. It was night here. The air was cooler, heavy with the scent of unfamiliar flowers. The sky overhead was alive with stars, more than he'd ever seen, sharp and bright, as if the atmosphere itself had been scrubbed clean. She stepped through after him, the shimmer snapping shut behind her. Ethan turned in a slow circle, taking in the strange landscape. Where the hell are we? Not hell, she said quietly, but not far from it. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, for two people from different worlds fighting to survive together, stick around. There's much more to come. The first thing Ethan noticed in this new place was the silence. Not the dead, empty kind of silence the desert had. It was deeper, thicker, as if the air itself was listening. He turned slowly, taking in their surroundings. They stood on a stretch of uneven ground covered in dark moss that glowed faintly blue in places, as if lit from within. Low hills rose in the distance, their slopes lined with silver-leaf trees that shimmered whenever a stray breeze touched them. Above, the sky blazed with constellations he didn't recognize, clusters of light twisted into shapes his mind couldn't name. It was beautiful, but Ethan's instincts refused to relax. We're not on Earth anymore, are we? She glanced at him, one corner of her mouth twitching faintly. Still Earth. Just not your part of it. That's not an answer. It's the only one you get right now. Ethan bit back a retort and shifted his weight, wincing at the stab of pain in his leg. The makeshift bandage was crusted over with dry blood. She noticed, of course. She noticed everything. Sit, she said. I'm fine. You're limping so hard. The ground probably feels sorry for you. Sit. Reluctantly, he lowered himself onto a patch of moss. It gave under his weight like a cushion. She knelt beside him, producing a small silver case from her coat. Inside were narrow glass vials filled with liquid that shimmered in shifting colors. That's not exactly standard first aid, he said. It's better, she replied. Hold still. The liquid stung at first, a burn that made him grit his teeth. But almost instantly, the pain faded, replaced by a cool, soothing numbness that seeped deep into the muscle. Your blood will heal slower here, she said. Different atmospheric balance. This will help. Ethan studied her while she worked. In the shifting starlight, she looked different, less dangerous, maybe, or just less guarded. Her hair framed her face in loose strands, and he noticed for the first time the faint trace of a scar along her jaw. "You going to tell me your name now?" he asked. She didn't look up. Names have power, so pick one that doesn't. That earned him the smallest smile. "Call me Lyra." "Lyra," he repeated, testing the sound. "You don't sound like someone who hides behind fake names." Her hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their work. "I don't hide. I survive." Before Ethan could push further, a sound drifted through the still air, a low, mournful hum that seemed to vibrate in his bones. It came from somewhere beyond the silver trees. Lyra's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "What now?" Ethan asked. "Not them," she said, rising to her feet. "Something worse. Define worse." She scanned the tree line. "Predators. Native to this place. They'll smell your blood before they see us." Ethan got to his feet, testing his leg. It was still weak, but the pain was muted. "So we move." We move fast. They headed toward a slope on the far side of the clearing, the glow of the moss fading as they left it behind. The humming sound grew louder, splitting into two distinct tones that rose and fell like some twisted duet. Ethan glanced at her. "You're sure they're after me?" "They're after whatever's bleeding," she said simply. Comforting. They crested the hill and froze. Below them stretched a valley bathed in pale blue light. At its center stood a structure unlike anything Ethan had ever seen, a spire of interlocking black and silver panels, twisting upward like a frozen cyclone. Around it, dozens of smaller shapes moved in slow, deliberate patterns. Ethan squinted. "Tell me those aren't more of your friends from the desert." "They're not my friends," Lyra said sharply. "And they shouldn't be here." One of the moving shapes turned, and Ethan saw it clearly. A tall, insect-like creature, its segmented body armored in glossy black plates. Long, jointed limbs ended in hooked claws, and a cluster of glimmering red eyes swept the valley. He exhaled slowly. "Please tell me they're at least friendly." "They're not." She crouched low, pulling him down with her. "That spire is a relay point. If they activate it, every hunter drone on your planet will know exactly where we are." Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. "And I'm guessing walking away isn't an option. Not unless you want your world to end sooner." He glanced at the cube, still secured at her hip. "And this is where we use that thing." Her jaw tightened. "Not yet. It's our last defense. If it's destroyed, there's no hiding from them at all." The humming sound from before rose suddenly, echoing through the valley. Lyra's eyes darted toward the silver trees at the edge. Two shapes emerged, low, sinewy, with glistening hides that caught the light like oil on water. Their heads were narrow, their jaws lined with teeth that curved backward like hooks. Ethan muttered, "Guess the predators found us after all." "They'll attack the sentries first," Lyra said, her voice low but steady. "We move while they're distracted." Sure enough, the creatures streaked down into the valley with terrifying speed, leaping onto one of the insect-like sentries. The air filled with the sound of metal scraping against bone, alien roars mingling with mechanical shrieks. Lyra pulled him along the ridge, keeping low. "This way, there's a path to the spire from the north side." They slipped between boulders and low brush, the chaos below covering their movement. The closer they got to the spire, the more Ethan felt a low vibration in his chest, like the air was thrumming with energy. At the base, Lyra paused, scanning the surface. Her hand brushed over a panel, and a seam appeared, splitting open to reveal a narrow entrance. "You first," she said. Inside, the air was cooler, and the sound from outside was muted. The walls pulsed faintly with light, threads of energy running through them like veins. Ethan ran his fingers over one. "Feels alive." "It's a living relay," she said. "The structure grows around the core, feeding it power." "Which means—" Before she could finish, a metallic shriek echoed inside. One of the insect-like sentries had made it in, its limbs scraping along the walls as it advanced toward them. Lyra stepped in front of Ethan, blade drawn. "Stay behind me." "I'm not a civilian," he said. "You're bleeding. That makes you a target." The creature lunged, and Lyra met it head-on. Her movements were a blur, dodging, slashing, twisting away from clawed strikes. Sparks flew as her blade glanced off its armored plates. Ethan spotted a cluster of exposed tubing along the wall, pulsing with light. On instinct, he yanked his knife and slashed through it. The tube burst in a shower of blue sparks, and the creature jerked violently, emitting a high-pitched screech before collapsing. Lyra turned, eyes widening for a fraction of a second. That was reckless. Yeah, Ethan said, but it worked. She allowed herself a brief smile before glancing toward the core chamber deeper inside. Then let's finish this before more show up. The core chamber was a perfect sphere, its walls layered with interlocking black panels streaked with faint veins of silver light. At the center floated a crystalline column, rotating slowly, casting fractured reflections across the curved walls. The hum here was steady and low, like a heartbeat. Lyra stepped inside first, scanning every corner with the reflex of someone who never assumed a room was empty just because it looked that way. Ethan followed, his eyes drawn instantly to the floating column. "That's it," he asked. "That thing can find us anywhere on the planet." "Not just you," she said, moving toward the base of the column. "It can map energy signatures across light years. Once they finish the activation sequence, hiding won't be possible for anyone." She knelt, pulling a small device from her coat, flat, triangular, covered in delicate, etched lines. She pressed it against the base of the core. It clung instantly, lights flaring along its edges. "What's that going to do?" Ethan asked. "Scramble its broadcast pattern," she said. "Buy us time." "How much time?" Her eyes flicked to his. "Less than you want." Ethan's gaze drifted around the chamber, taking in the alien elegance of the place. It was beautiful in a way that didn't feel human. Every line purposeful, every surface tuned to something unseen. "You've done this before," he said. "Not here, but somewhere like this." Lyra didn't answer right away. "3 times, she said finally. "And each time, I left people behind." Ethan studied her. There was a shadow in her voice now, something raw beneath the control she usually wore like armor. "People you couldn't save?" he asked. Her jaw tightened. "People who trusted me to save them." For a long moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the core. Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. "And now you're here, with me, risking the same thing again." "What?" She looked up at him then, and for the first time, her expression softened, not with pity, but with a kind of cautious respect. "Because you didn't run when you had the chance. That's your big qualification for trusting me," he said, half smiling. "It's rarer than you think." They held each other's gaze for a beat too long before Lyra turned back to the core, her fingers moving over the device. The lights on its surface shifted from blue to green. "It's done," she said. "We can leave." Before they could move, a tremor rolled through the floor, subtle but enough to make Ethan tense. "Please tell me that's just this place shutting down." Her expression told him it wasn't. The walls brightened suddenly, silver veins flaring white. A deep, resonant tone filled the chamber, vibrating through the bones of his skull. "They've triggered a failsafe," Lyra said, rising quickly. "If the core's broadcast is scrambled, it self-destructs." "Great," Ethan muttered. "How long do we have?" "Minutes. Maybe less." They ran. The curved hallway outside the chamber seemed longer than before, the hum behind them climbing into a sharper, more urgent pitch. Halfway up the corridor, Lyra slowed. "Wait." Ethan skidded to a halt. "We don't have time for." She grabbed his arm and pulled him into a shadowed alcove. Footsteps, heavy, metallic, echoed ahead. 2 sentries appeared, moving in perfect sync, their clawed limbs glinting in the dim light. Lyra's grip tightened briefly on his arm. "We can't take them both quietly." "Then we don't," Ethan said. "We make it loud." Her brow furrowed, but there was no time to argue. Ethan stepped out into the hall, making sure the sentries saw him. They lunged instantly, metal claws gouging the walls. Lyra darted in behind them, blade flashing in precise arcs. One sentry collapsed under her strike, its head snapping back with a hiss of sparks. Ethan ducked under a swing from the second, jamming his knife into a joint in its armor. The machine shuddered violently before toppling. They didn't stop moving after that. The outer doors of the relay opened into the cool night again. The silver-leafed trees shimmered under the alien stars, their leaves whispering softly in the breeze. Ethan turned to her. "Now what?" "Now we get far enough away before it blows." They ran for the ridge, the moss-covered ground swallowing their footsteps. Behind them, the hum of the relay climbed higher and higher until it became a single piercing tone, then cut off. The silence that followed was deep and sudden. Then came the blast. A column of white-blue light shot into the sky where the spire had been, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Ethan stumbled, and Lyra caught his arm to steady him. The shock wave rolled over them, warm but not burning, carrying with it the smell of ozone and scorched earth. When it was over, the spire was gone. Only a shallow crater remained, faintly glowing at the edges. They stood there for a long moment, catching their breath. "You just made them very angry," Ethan said. Her mouth curved into a small, almost defiant smile. "Good." Ethan watched her, really watched her this time. Not the fighter, not the fugitive, but the person standing in the pale starlight with her hair stirring in the breeze. "You're not going to tell me the whole truth about why you're here, are you?" he asked. "Not tonight," she said quietly. "But maybe soon." Something in her voice made it feel less like an evasion and more like a promise. They started walking again, the night air cool on their faces. For the first time since the desert, Ethan realized his leg didn't hurt as much. Or maybe he just wasn't thinking about it, because the silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with something unspoken, steady as the stars overhead. The forest beyond the ridge thinned into a wide, grassy basin. Moonlight spilled across the open ground, painting everything in silver and shadow. Lyra slowed, scanning the horizon. "They'll be coming," she said. "The blast will have drawn every patrol in range." Ethan adjusted the grip on his knife. "Then we keep moving." Before she could answer, a low, pulsing rumble rolled across the basin. At first, Ethan thought it was distant thunder. Then he saw the lights, 3 of them, burning white, moving fast. "Shuttles," Lyra said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes sharpened. "They're cutting off the exit routes." The first shuttle landed hard, its landing struts crushing the grass beneath. The other 2 circled overhead, their searchlights sweeping. The air was suddenly thick with the smell of ionized metal and scorched earth. "Ethan," Lyra said, stepping close, "you're going to see things that don't make sense. Don't freeze." "Not my style," he said. But the truth was his chest was tight. His body still carried the exhaustion of the relay fight. Figures emerged from the landed shuttle, tall, armored, each moving with mechanical precision. Their eyes glowed faintly from behind their helmets. 6 of them, fanning out. Lyra's blade appeared in her hand, like it had been there all along. The metal caught the moonlight, and Ethan could see the faint etching along its length, alien script that seemed to shift when he looked directly at it. "They won't take me alive," she said. Ethan glanced at her. "That's convenient. Neither will they take me." The first soldier lunged, its movements blurring in the dark. Lyra met it head-on, the clash ringing like a bell in the still night. Sparks burst where blade met armor. Ethan moved on instinct, sidestepping the next attacker, driving his knife into a seam between chest plate and shoulder. It let out a metallic hiss, collapsing to one knee before he wrenched the blade free. Another came at him, weapon raised. Before it could strike, a streak of black hair flashed past. Lyra, pivoting low, severing its leg in a single, precise motion. "Stay with me," she shouted, already turning to the next. The fight became a blur, metal striking metal, the burn of near misses, the smell of hot circuits and blood. Ethan lost count of how many they dropped. Then came the sound that froze them both, the high, keening hum of something charging. Above, one of the shuttles had turned its nose toward the basin. Panels slid open along its underside, revealing the unmistakable glow of a focused energy weapon. "They're going to wipe the field," Lyra said. Ethan's mind snapped to a single truth. If they stayed here, there'd be nothing left to bury. "Go," he shouted, grabbing her arm. But she didn't move. Her eyes locked on the shuttle, jaw set. "I can stop it." "Not without." "Go," she said again, but this time it was a command. She broke free and sprinted toward the center of the basin, blade flashing. Ethan cursed, then followed. He wasn't about to let her take the hit alone. The shuttle's weapon pulsed brighter, the glow painting their skin in white light. Lyra reached into her coat and pulled something Ethan hadn't seen before, a small, circular device no bigger than her palm. She slammed it into the ground. It emitted a rapid series of ascending tones, and a shimmering wall of distortion erupted upward, arching toward the shuttle. The beam fired, pure, blinding light. It hit the barrier with a sound like glass shattering underwater. The shield held, but only for a heartbeat before it collapsed, scattering into the night like dust and wind. The blast's edge caught them anyway. Ethan felt the shock wave tear the air from his lungs and hurl him backward. He hit the ground hard, the world dimming at the edges. When his vision cleared, the shuttle was retreating, smoke pouring from one wing. The other two had vanished into the distance. Ethan rolled to his side, searching. Then he saw her. Lyra lay a few meters away, her blade still in hand. She was breathing, but her left side was slick with blood, her coat burned through. He crawled to her, ignoring the screaming protest of his own muscles. "Stay with me," he said, pressing his hand over the wound. Her eyes found his, a faint smile tugging at her lips despite the pain. "You didn't run." "Not my style," he said, and this time it was the truth. The night was quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. This one was heavier, shaped by the knowledge that they'd both crossed a line, into something neither could walk away from unchanged. Ethan kept his hand on her wound, feeling her heartbeat under his palm. "Steady for now. Can you move?" he asked. She nodded once, barely. "With your help." He slid his arm under her shoulders, lifting carefully. The two of them rose together, shaky but still standing, and began the slow walk toward the shadowed treeline. Behind them, the basin bore the scars of the fight: burnt grass, shattered armor, the crater where the shield had bloomed and died. In Ethan's mind, it wasn't just the ground that had changed tonight. So had they. The forest swallowed them in silence, broken only by their labored breaths and the distant rustle of wind through dry leaves. The moonlight barely reached through the canopy, leaving the world in shifting patterns of shadow and silver. Ethan could feel Lyra's weight leaning into him, her steps uneven but stubborn. Every few yards she'd stumble, and he'd tighten his arm around her, forcing both of them forward. They didn't speak for a long time. Words felt too fragile here, like they might shatter the thin barrier keeping them upright. Finally, Ethan spotted a break in the trees, a small clearing where the grass was soft and dry. He lowered her carefully to the ground, easing her back against the base of a fallen log. "Let me see," he said, already pulling the medkit from his pack. "You need it more than I do," she replied. Her voice was faint, but there was a spark of defiance in it. Not up for debate. The beam from his small flashlight swept over her wound. The burn across her side was deep, the edges char-black. Blood had slowed, but hadn't stopped entirely. Ethan worked quickly, cleaning the wound with a bitter-smelling antiseptic, then sealing it with the medkit's polymer spray. It hissed softly as it bonded to her skin. She flinched once, but her eyes stayed locked on his face. "You could have left me." "I could have," he said without looking up. "But I didn't." "Why?" He paused, tape in hand. There was no good way to explain it, at least not in words. "Because I'm not done with you yet." Her lips curved just slightly. "That's not a safe answer, Ethan Keller." He finished securing the dressing and sat back, wiping sweat from his brow. The fight, the run, the heat, it all caught up to him at once, settling into his bones like lead. Lyra tilted her head, studying him. "You're injured too." "It can wait." "It shouldn't." Before he could protest, she reached for his leg. He tried to pull back, but her grip was surprisingly strong despite her condition. She tore away the bloodstained bandage, examining the gash beneath. Her touch was clinical but careful, as though she'd done this 1,000 times. "This isn't from tonight," she said. "This is older. You've been pushing on it for days." He didn't answer. The truth was, he'd stopped counting the hours since it happened. She cleaned the wound with practiced efficiency, muttering something in a language he didn't recognize, a low, rhythmic sound, almost like a song. The sting of the antiseptic faded as she applied a salve from her own belt pouch, thicker and cooler than anything in his kit. "This will speed the healing," she said, "if you don't tear it open again." "Not planning on it," he said. They sat in silence after that, both leaning against the fallen log. The night air was cooler here, carrying the faint scent of juniper and ash. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, its voice rising and falling in the dark. Ethan's gaze drifted to the sky above the tree line. "Think they'll come back tonight? They'll regroup first," she said. "They underestimated you. That's a first. They won't make that mistake again." Her tone carried no fear, only certainty. It was the same tone she'd used before charging the shuttle's weapon. That unwavering resolve, even in the face of annihilation, was something Ethan still couldn't decide was inspiring or insane. He studied her profile in the dim light. There was something in the way her hair fell over her face, the stubborn line of her jaw, the quiet way she endured pain. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met, human or otherwise. And she was still here. "Tomorrow," she said, breaking the silence, "we need to reach the ridge north of here. There's a comm relay I can use to contact someone I trust." "Trust," he repeated, as if testing the weight of the word. "How many people is that?" "One." He huffed a quiet laugh. "Guess I'm lucky to make the short list." "Don't get comfortable," she said, but her eyes softened for just a heartbeat. The forest seemed to lean closer around them, the shadows deepening as the moon sank lower. Fatigue began to gnaw at Ethan's edges, but he forced himself to stay alert, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, her breathing evening out. "We're not safe yet, but for now you can rest." He wanted to argue, to insist on taking first watch, but the weight in his limbs was undeniable. "You wake me if you hear anything," he said. "I will." Ethan's head rested against the log, the sounds of the desert night wrapping around him like a slow tide. The last thing he saw before sleep took him was Lyra's silhouette, upright and watchful, her blade resting across her knees. Somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't the end of their fight, but for tonight, they were still breathing. And that was enough. The dawn came quietly, slipping into the forest with soft gold light that spilled across the clearing. Ethan woke to the sound of birds, small, sharp calls that felt almost foreign after days of gunfire and screams. Lyra was still seated where she'd been the night before, though her head had dipped forward at some point. Her black hair fell like a curtain over her face, hiding her eyes. The blade across her knees was still in her grip, one hand resting lightly on the hilt. Ethan pushed himself upright, his muscles stiff but his leg blessedly less painful than he remembered. The salve she'd used had worked better than he'd dared hope. "You didn't wake me," he said. "I didn't need to." She glanced at him, her gaze sharp despite the weariness in her voice. No one came. The quiet between them was different this morning, less tense, more knowing. He studied her for a moment. "You ever think about before all this? Before the fighting?" Her eyes went distant. "I think about before, every time I'm forced to do something I swore I wouldn't." He frowned. "And yet you came here. It wasn't a choice." She hesitated, then added, "But meeting you wasn't in the plan either." It was a simple sentence, but it carried weight, the kind that lingered. Ethan stood, stretching until his back popped, then offered her a hand. She took it, her grip warm and steady despite the chill in the air. They broke camp quickly, moving north through the thinning trees. As the sun climbed higher, the forest gave way to open land, rolling hills dusted with pale grass and the occasional boulder. The air smelled of sage and heat. For a long time, they walked in silence. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Last night, when you said you trust one person, who is it?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "A friend. Someone who's saved my life more times than I can count. He's the reason I still believe in anything." Ethan didn't push, but the answer settled heavily in his mind. Trust wasn't something she handed out easily. He'd seen that already. If he wanted to earn it fully, he'd have to survive whatever was coming next. They crested a ridge, and the world seemed to open beneath them. Miles of desert stretched to the horizon, the land fractured into jagged canyons and windswept plateaus. "That ridge you mentioned," Ethan said. "I'm guessing it's somewhere out there." She nodded. "And the closer we get, the more dangerous it will be. They'll know the relay is our best shot. They're counting on us giving up before we make it," he said. "They don't understand you," she replied. "Not yet." He glanced at her. "You think you do?" Her mouth quirked into the barest hint of a smile. "I'm learning." They stopped near a boulder, using its shadow to rest. Ethan drank from his canteen, then passed it to her. She took a measured sip, her gaze never leaving the horizon. "Where I'm from," she said suddenly, Strength isn't measured by who survives the longest. It's measured by who's willing to risk themselves for someone else. That's not so different from here, Ethan said. Maybe. But on my world, we don't pretend those people are expendable after they've done it. The bitterness in her tone was sharp, and Ethan understood. It wasn't just about her people. It was about the war, the betrayals, the endless cycle of sacrifice and abandonment. I don't plan on being expendable, he said. She looked at him, then really looked, as if weighing the truth in his words. Finally, she nodded once. They moved on, each step bringing them closer to the relay and whatever waited beyond. The heat rose in waves from the ground, distorting the air, but neither of them slowed. Hours later, they reached a narrow canyon, its walls high and jagged. The path wound between them like a vein of shadow through stone. Once we're through here, it's 2 more miles, Lyra said. After that, everything changes. Ethan didn't ask how. He just tightened his grip on a rifle slung over his shoulder and followed her in. The canyon was quiet except for the crunch of their boots on gravel. Above, the strip of sky was a pale ribbon between the cliffs. Halfway through, they stopped to drink again. Ethan leaned against the wall, feeling the coolness of the rock against his back. Lyra stood opposite him, scanning the way ahead. You know, he said, when her blade broke that night, I thought it was over, that you were done. She tilted her head. And yet you smiled. He shrugged. Guess I realized the fight wasn't over just because the weapon was. She stepped closer, her gaze locked on his. Weapons break. People don't have to. The moment hung there, charged but fragile. Then she turned away, and the spell broke. They kept walking. By the time the canyon widened into open land again, the sun was dipping low, casting the desert in amber light. The relay was still out of sight, but Ethan could feel it. Their destination was close. So was the danger. They set up a small camp in the shadow of an outcrop, just enough cover to hide from aerial scans. As they settled in for the night, Lyra glanced over at him. Tomorrow decides everything, she said. He nodded. Then we'd better be ready. And for the first time since they'd met, they both smiled at the same moment. An unspoken agreement that whatever came next, they were facing it together. The relay tower still stood, a crooked skeleton of steel and glass against the endless desert sky. Its panels were cracked, its antenna twisted, but it still hummed faintly, alive enough to send one last signal. Ethan leaned against the base, breathing hard, his chest aching from the sprint and the fight before it. The sand around them was littered with scorch marks and the faint shimmer of cooling alien alloy. The air smelled of ozone and dust. Lyra was already at the console, her hands flying across the interface. Her black hair clung to her face in damp strands, her pale skin flushed from heat and adrenaline. It's done, she said. Her voice carried both exhaustion and relief. The coordinates are locked. When the pulse fires, they'll know where to find us. Us? He asked. She glanced back at him, her dark eyes unwavering. You didn't think I was going back without you, did you? The truth was, Ethan had. A part of him had been ready to watch her vanish into the stars, never to return. But hearing her say it, us, hit harder than he'd expected. They stood in silence as the machine built up power, a low vibration rumbling through the ground. When the pulse finally fired, it wasn't just a flash. It was a wave of light that rolled out across the horizon, a ripple that seemed to bend the very air. Somewhere far above, a response would begin. By the time the sun dipped behind the western ridge, the relay had gone quiet. The war might not be over, but here, in this small corner of it, they had done something that mattered. Lyra stepped closer to him. When they come, things will change. Better or worse. Different, she said simply. But with you, I'll take different. Ethan managed a small smile. Guess that makes 2 of us. They started walking away from the tower, their shadows stretching long over the sand. The desert wind carried the faint hum of the tower's last breath, fading into the distance. Behind them, the signal traveled across the void. Ahead, the world waited, uncertain, dangerous, but theirs to face together. And if you'd asked Ethan in that moment whether the fight had been worth it, whether the broken blade, the pain, and the risk had been too high a price, he'd have told you no price was too high for what he'd found here. Not in 1,000 lifetimes. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories like this waiting for you.